Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. You keep ending up in the same situations, even when everything around you looks different. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that you almost miss it. At first, it feels like coincidence, then it feels like frustration, and eventually, it feels like something deeper you can't quite name, like you're moving forward on the surface, but internally, nothing is actually shifting. This video explores that feeling, not to diagnose it, not to solve it, but to stay with it long enough that something starts to make sense on its own. Because a lot of people are sensing this right now. The repetition, the subtle loop, the sense that life keeps presenting the same emotional themes through different faces, different jobs, different seasons. And what's unsettling is not the repetition itself. It's the fact that part of you recognizes it. You notice the pattern. You feel the familiarity. You almost expect the moment before it happens. Not because you're pessimistic, but because something inside you has seen this before. There's a strange tension in that. You're not confused. You're not fully clear either. You're somewhere in between. And maybe the most uncomfortable part is that no external change seems to fully touch it. New routines don't fix it. New environments don't fix it. Even major life shifts don't dissolve it completely. It just reshapes. The faces change, the details change, but the internal experience feels familiar. That's not a failure, it's not even a problem, it's a signal, and we'll stay with that slowly. Not to define it yet, just to notice it together. Because if you've ever had the quiet thought, why does this feel like the same story again, just with different characters? Then you're already inside the territory this video is about. There's more depth to that feeling than it seems at first, but we'll return to it gently later. Right now, just consider this. Most people don't actually feel like their life is repetitive because events repeat. They feel it because their inner experience repeats. The same emotional edges, the same internal conflicts, the same moment of self-doubt at slightly different times, the same hope followed by the same hesitation. It's subtle, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a faint sense of déjà vu inside yourself. You meet someone new, but the dynamic feels familiar. You start something fresh, but the internal resistance feels identical. You move into a new phase of life, but the same invisible ceiling seems to follow you. Not as punishment, not as bad luck, just as continuity. Like awareness itself hasn't shifted yet, even when circumstances have. That's not a judgment, it's an observation. And there's something honest about observing that without trying to fix it immediately. Because what most people try to do is force change at the level of behavior. They adjust the surface, they rearrange the external, they redesign the structure, but the internal lens remains untouched, so the world rearranges itself to match that same lens. Not aggressively, not intentionally, just naturally. It's similar to how you can walk into 10 different rooms but carry the same mood into each one. The rooms change, the feeling doesn't, and slowly, quietly, without anyone announcing it, you start to realize that the repetition isn't happening out there. It's happening through you. That realization can feel heavy at first, but it's not meant to be. It's not about blame, it's about clarity. Because once you notice that awareness itself is the consistent thread, you start to see something else too. You start to see that you're not stuck in events, you're moving through reflections, not as a concept, as an experience. You say something in a certain tone, and the world responds accordingly. You carry a certain assumption, and situations seem to mirror it back. You expect a certain ending, and life strangely seems to cooperate with that expectation. Not because life is against you, but because life is responsive to you. There's a difference, and you don't have to believe that for it to be true. You've already lived it. Think of the times your internal state shifted, even slightly, and suddenly people reacted differently to you. The same environments felt lighter. The same challenges felt less suffocating. Nothing external changed, but everything felt different. That's not philosophy, that's lived experience. And it's worth noticing, because if awareness shapes experience, even gently, then repetition isn't a curse. It's communication. It's not life trapping you, it's life reflecting you. And that's uncomfortable only when you think you're powerless within it. But what if awareness doesn't need to be forced? What if it only needs to be seen? Sometimes, the moment you notice a pattern clearly, without trying to escape it, it begins to soften on its own. Not because you tried harder, but because you finally looked directly. There's a quiet clarity that comes with that kind of seeing. Not dramatic, not emotional, just clean. Like suddenly realizing you've been standing in the same place emotionally for a while, even while your life looked like it was moving. That realization doesn't condemn you, it frees you, because it shifts the question. Instead of asking, why does this keep happening to me? You begin asking, what part of me keeps meeting life from this angle? That's not self-blame, that's self-awareness, and self-awareness changes things more deeply than effort ever could. Pause for a moment. Notice how even now as you listen, your mind is probably connecting this to personal experiences, moments that felt repetitive, cycles you've questioned, patterns you've almost accepted as normal. That's not accidental, that's recognition. And recognition is the beginning of movement. Not outward movement, inward shift. And that shift doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be as simple as seeing your own patterns without defending them, without explaining them, without fixing them, just noticing them honestly. There's something else here too. You're not just repeating experiences, you're also repeating identities. The version of yourself you believe you are, the limits you quietly assume, the expectations you hold without realizing you're holding them. Those shape everything. You don't experience life directly. You experience life through the lens of who you think you are. And if that identity stays static, the world around you reorganizes to match it again and again. Different job, same inner ceiling, different relationship, same emotional role, different city, same internal story. Not because life is cruel, but because consistency exists at the level of awareness. And awareness doesn't shift through force. It shifts through perception, through noticing, through honesty, through quiet recognition. That's why trying to overhaul your life without touching awareness often leads back to the same place. New scenery, same internal rhythm. There's more here than it seems, but we'll return to it later. For now, notice something subtle. The repetition isn't constant. There are moments when it breaks, moments when you feel genuinely present, moments when something inside you opens, moments when life feels fresh, unfiltered, real. They don't always last, but they exist. And those moments are important because they show you that repetition is not permanent, it's conditional. It depends on the state you're inhabiting. You've felt it before. The days where everything seems slightly lighter for no clear reason. The conversations that feel more natural. The clarity that arrives without effort. Nothing external orchestrated that. It emerged from within, and that tells you something fundamental. Your experience of reality is not fixed. It's responsive, not to effort, to alignment, not to struggle, to clarity. Alignment is not something you achieve, it's something you notice. It's the absence of internal resistance, the moment you stop forcing yourself to be something, the moment you allow yourself to be present without managing the experience. Those moments feel different, not euphoric, just real. And they break the repetition. But when you drift back into unconscious patterns, the repetition returns, not as punishment, as feedback. It's like listening to the same song on repeat without realizing you're the one pressing play, until you notice your finger on the button. Then everything changes, quietly. You don't have to stop the song immediately. You just become aware that you could. That's power without pressure, that's awareness doing its work naturally, and it's happening more frequently for people right now. You can sense it culturally, individually, collectively. People questioning their routines, people noticing their patterns, people realizing they've been living from scripts they didn't consciously choose. Not loudly, not in headlines, but in private moments, in thoughts they don't share publicly, in realizations they haven't fully articulated yet. A quiet shift, a subtle awakening, not spiritual, just perceptual, a growing recognition that something internal is asking for attention, and not in a demanding way, in a patient way, like awareness waiting for you to notice it. Here's something gentle to consider. What if the repetition you've experienced isn't meant to frustrate you, but to familiarize you with your own lens? What if it's been offering consistency so you could recognize it? You can't notice a pattern if it never repeats. You can't become aware of your state if life never reflects it back. So maybe the repetition wasn't a trap. Maybe it was an invitation. Not to change everything, but to see something, to see how you've been seeing. That's subtle, but it's profound. Because perception shapes experience more than effort ever could. Effort rearranges the surface. Perception alters the foundation. You don't need to fight your patterns. You don't need to shame them. You don't need to overcome them. You just need to see them clearly enough that they lose their unconscious grip. Awareness dissolves what force cannot. And awareness isn't something you add, it's something you remember. You've always been capable of observing yourself. You've always had moments of clarity. You've always sensed when you were aligned and when you weren't. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about noticing who you already are when you're not forcing anything. And that's where repetition begins to loosen. Not instantly, not dramatically, but organically. You start responding differently. You start choosing differently without effort. You start experiencing life through a slightly altered lens. And suddenly, the same world feels different. Not because the world changed, because you did. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, but enough. That's why this isn't about fixing your life. It's about noticing your awareness. Life doesn't repeat because you're failing. It repeats because you're consistent. And consistency isn't wrong, it's informative. It shows you exactly where your awareness is rooted. And when awareness shifts, even slightly, the repetition changes too. Different patterns emerge, different experiences surface, different emotional textures appear. Not because you forced transformation, because you allowed perception to evolve. This might feel abstract, but you've lived it. Think of a time when you outgrew something without trying, a mindset that simply no longer fit, a dynamic that naturally dissolved, a fear that lost its charge without a battle. That wasn't effort, that was awareness maturing, and awareness matures through observation, not pressure. You're not meant to escape your patterns. You're meant to understand them. Because once understood, they can't operate unconsciously anymore. They don't control you. They inform you. And that changes everything, quietly. If any part of this resonates, you might find yourself thinking of specific patterns, specific loops, specific emotional rhythms. If so, you're not alone in that recognition. Many people are noticing similar things, even if they describe them differently. Sometimes just acknowledging that shared recognition is enough to shift something. Not to resolve it, just to soften it. And softening is often where real change begins, because awareness doesn't push, it opens, and openness invites new experience naturally. There's another layer here. Repetition doesn't just exist in events, it exists in interpretation. Two people can live through identical circumstances and experience completely different realities, not because of optimism, but because of perception. One sees threat, one sees opportunity, one feels trapped, one feels curious. Same situation, different internal lens. So when life feels repetitive, the question isn't only what's happening, it's how you're interpreting what's happening. Not consciously, subconsciously, the assumptions you carry, the meanings you assign, the identity you inhabit. Those shape everything, and those are not fixed. They're habits of awareness. Habits can change when seen, not when fought, when noticed. That's why this isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming clearer. Clearer with yourself, clearer with your patterns, clearer with your internal state. Clarity does more than effort ever could. Because effort often comes from misalignment, clarity comes from presence. And presence dissolves repetition naturally, not instantly, not magically, but authentically. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to choose instead of repeat. You begin to notice instead of assume. And slowly, life stops feeling like the same story playing on loop. Not because everything changes, but because you do. That shift is already happening for many people. Quietly, individually, without announcement. People noticing their patterns, questioning their identities, re-evaluating what feels real, not in dramatic ways, in subtle ones. A pause before reacting, a moment of self-awareness mid-conversation, a realization that an old narrative no longer fits. Those are signs of awareness evolving, and as awareness evolves, experience changes. Not because you're trying to evolve, but because you're allowing yourself to see more honestly. That's the real movement. Not upward, inward, not forward, deeper. And the repetition you once felt trapped in begins to feel like a map instead. Not something to escape, something to understand. You start seeing the pattern, and once seen, it loses its unconscious power. It becomes visible, workable, fluid. There's more depth to this realization than appears on the surface, and we'll return to it later. For now, notice this. You're not listening to this because you're confused. You're listening because something already resonates. You're not being introduced to a new idea. You're recognizing something familiar. That familiarity isn't intellectual. It's experiential. It feels like remembering something you already knew but hadn't articulated. And that's exactly the territory we're in. Not teaching, not instructing, just unfolding recognition. Because the most meaningful shifts don't come from learning something new. They come from seeing something clearly that was already there. And clarity doesn't force change, it allows it. So maybe life feels repetitive, not because you're stuck, but because awareness is waiting to be noticed. Not dramatically, just gently. And maybe you're closer to that noticing than you think. As this continues, you might start seeing your experiences differently, not judging them, just observing them. Patterns becoming visible, reactions becoming noticeable, moments of alignment becoming clearer. That's not transformation, that's awareness awakening to itself. And that doesn't need effort, it needs honesty. Honesty with your internal state, honesty with your emotional patterns, honesty with your lived experience. No performance, no improvement, just recognition, that's enough. Because recognition shifts perception, and perception reshapes reality. Not forcefully, naturally. And when perception shifts, repetition transforms into evolution. Not overnight, not spectacularly, but authentically. You're not meant to escape the loop. You're meant to become aware of the lens creating it. And the moment you see the lens clearly, you're no longer trapped inside it. You're observing it. And observation changes everything. Quietly, gently, irreversibly. There's no conclusion here, no resolution, no final answer, just an ongoing recognition. A sense that life isn't repeating to punish you, but reflecting to inform you. A sense that awareness isn't something you need to build, but something you're slowly remembering how to inhabit. And as that remembering continues, the experience of life shifts naturally. Not because you tried to change it, but because you allowed yourself to see it. If you find yourself reflecting on your own patterns while listening, that's not something to solve, that's something to notice. That noticing is the real movement. And it doesn't end here. It continues after the video ends. In your thoughts, in your moments, in your quiet observations. Not as a task, as a natural unfolding. If you ever feel like sharing what patterns you've started noticing, you're not the only one experiencing that recognition. Many people are quietly arriving at similar realizations, not because they're following anything, but because awareness is shifting naturally across individuals, not globally, not dramatically, individually, quietly. And that's how real change always begins. Not with declarations, with perception, not with intensity, with clarity, not with force, with honesty. And maybe, just maybe, the repetition you've been feeling wasn't an obstacle at all. Maybe it was the invitation that brought you here. Sometimes the repetition isn't loud enough to feel like a crisis. Sometimes it's just dull, not painful, just slightly empty. Days blending into each other, conversations feeling predictable, reactions happening before you even consciously choose them. You wake up, do what you usually do, think what you usually think, feel what you usually feel, not because you're trapped, but because familiarity has momentum, and momentum feels natural when you're inside it. There's a strange comfort in repetition, even when it's uncomfortable, because it's known, because it's familiar, because you already know how to survive inside it. And sometimes, what keeps people in the loop isn't ignorance, it's identity, not consciously, subtly. You get used to being the one who overthinks, the one who hesitates, the one who gives too much, the one who stays quiet, the one who carries tension in certain rooms. Those aren't just behaviors, they become roles. And once a role feels familiar, the world begins to cooperate with it. People respond to it, situations align with it, life reinforces it, not intentionally, just naturally. Pause for a second and notice something. You're probably already picturing moments where you felt like you were being yourself, but also sensing that this version of yourself might not be the only one available. That feeling matters, because identity isn't solid. It's practiced, not deliberately, but repeatedly. You don't wake up and choose who you are each day. You wake up and resume the version you left off as. The tone, the posture, the emotional baseline, the expectations, all carried forward without much awareness. And when that version of you stays the same, experience tends to stay familiar too. Not because you're stuck, because consistency produces consistency. But every once in a while, something interrupts that. A conversation that lands deeper than usual. A moment of unexpected honesty. A situation that pulls a different response out of you. You speak differently, you feel different. You notice yourself acting outside your usual pattern. Those moments are small, but they're important, because they show you something most people never consider. You are not one fixed self. You are many possible selves moving fluidly depending on state. You've lived that. You're different with certain people, different in certain environments, different in certain moods, different when you're rested, different when you're overwhelmed. Which one is the real you? Probably none of them fully, probably all of them partially. That's not confusing. That's liberating. Because if your identity is fluid, then repetition isn't fate. It's preference, not conscious preference, familiar preference. You keep returning to the version of yourself that feels known. But that doesn't mean other versions aren't available. They are. You just don't inhabit them often. Not because you can't, because you forget. Forgetfulness isn't failure, it's part of the experience. You forget how adaptable you are. You forget how perceptive you are. You forget how flexible your inner state can be. And life keeps presenting similar scenarios, not to punish you, but because that familiar version of you keeps meeting them in the same way. This isn't philosophical. You can see it in everyday moments. You walk into a room assuming you'll be ignored. Your posture changes. Your energy changes. People respond accordingly. You enter a conversation expecting conflict. Your tone shifts slightly. The other person feels it. The dynamic becomes tense, not because you're causing it, because you're participating in it unconsciously. And when you become aware of that participation, even for a second, the pattern loosens. Sometimes you notice yourself mid-reaction. You pause. You choose a different response. And suddenly, the moment unfolds differently than usual. That's not self-improvement. That's awareness interrupting momentum. A small reset. You don't need to force these resets. They happen naturally when you begin observing instead of assuming. That's why awareness is quieter than effort, but more powerful. Effort tries to change behavior. Awareness changes the space behavior emerges from. Different source, different result. And maybe that's why certain life lessons seem to repeat, because they're not about the situation. They're about the state. You can change partners, jobs, cities, routines, but if the internal lens remains unchanged, experience keeps echoing the same emotional themes, not because you're failing to grow, but because growth doesn't happen through changing scenery. It happens through changing perception. And perception doesn't shift by force, it shifts by noticing. That's why some of the deepest changes in people happen quietly, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through subtle realizations. They don't announce it, they don't post about it. They just begin to move differently through the same world. They listen differently, they respond differently, they interpret moments differently, and the world responds. Not because the world changed, because the lens did. You might be in that transition right now without fully naming it. You might be noticing your patterns more than you used to, catching yourself mid-thought, seeing emotional habits as habits, not truths. That's not regression, that's refinement, a gentle shift in awareness. And once awareness begins refining itself, repetition starts transforming from frustration into feedback. You stop asking, "Why is this happening again?" and start noticing, "Oh, that part of me is still here." Not judgment, recognition. There's a big difference. Recognition doesn't carry shame. It carries clarity. Shame tries to force change. Clarity allows change. That's why this process doesn't feel like becoming someone better. It feels like becoming more honest about reactions, more honest about patterns, more honest about internal states. And honesty doesn't hurt when it's gentle. It just illuminates. Think about how often you've had moments of sudden internal clarity, not because someone taught you something, but because you saw something in yourself directly. Those moments stay with you, not emotionally, perceptually. You don't unsee them, and once you begin to see your own patterns clearly, repetition begins to lose its grip, not instantly, but gradually, because the pattern relies on unconsciousness to sustain itself. Awareness destabilizes it, not violently, naturally. You don't have to fight your patterns, you just have to notice them without defending them, without narrating them, without justifying them, just seeing. And seeing changes things, not because you try to change, because you can't unknow what you now know. Another subtle shift often happens around this time. You begin to notice how much of your suffering came from resistance, not circumstance. The situation wasn't always unbearable. The tension around it was. The internal argument, the pressure to be different, the demand for things to resolve faster. That resistance creates friction. Friction feels like suffering. But when awareness grows, resistance softens. Not because you become passive, because you become present. Presence doesn't fight reality, it observes it. And observation dissolves a lot of unnecessary pain. Not all discomfort disappears, but the extra layer of mental struggle often does. That's not spirituality, that's experience. You've had moments where you accepted something internally and suddenly it didn't feel as heavy. The situation didn't change, but your experience did. That's the power of perception. Not magical, not exaggerated, just real. And when perception shifts, you begin moving through life differently. You might notice yourself less reactive, less attached to certain outcomes, less consumed by familiar loops. Not because you tried to become calm, because awareness naturally settled. This is often when life begins presenting different kinds of experiences, not necessarily easier ones, but different textures, different conversations, different opportunities, different responses from people, not as reward, as reflection. You're not being tested, you're being mirrored, and mirrors change when the one looking into them changes. That's not philosophy, that's observation. If you've ever felt like your life shifted without external explanation, you've experienced this, a period where things just felt different, more open, more fluid, more real. Those periods don't always last, but they show you what's possible. They reveal that reality is not static, it's responsive, not to effort, to state. And your state isn't something you manufacture, it's something you notice. Notice when you're tense, notice when you're open, notice when you're forcing, notice when you're allowing. That noticing is enough to begin altering the experience, not through control, through clarity. If you've had moments where you suddenly recognized one of your own patterns and felt something shift inside, you're not imagining that. That's awareness recalibrating. That's perception evolving. And that's the point where repetition begins to loosen its hold, not because you escaped it, because you outgrew the lens that sustained it. Sometimes people describe this as feeling like they're waking up slowly, not in a dramatic way, in a grounded way. They start seeing through old narratives, they start questioning assumptions they used to accept. They start realizing they don't have to carry certain internal roles anymore, not because someone told them to, because it no longer feels authentic. And authenticity isn't loud. It's quiet and stable, it doesn't demand, it aligns. You begin to feel when you're aligned and when you're not intellectually, somatically. Your body feels different, your mind feels different, your attention feels clearer, and you begin choosing alignment more often, not because you're trying to improve your life, but because it feels more real, less tension, less performance, less internal negotiation. That's not effort. That's honesty. And honesty changes your trajectory more than strategy ever could. Sometimes people worry that if they stop trying so hard, nothing will happen. But what often happens is the opposite. When resistance softens, movement becomes natural. When self-observation increases, choices become clearer. When awareness expands, opportunities appear without being chased. Not because life rewards you, because you're no longer filtering everything through old constraints. And that's where repetition transforms. You stop repeating the same emotional cycles. You stop reenacting the same dynamics. You stop meeting life from the same limited version of self, not because you forced change, because the version of you that needed to repeat those cycles quietly dissolved. And that doesn't feel like loss. It feels like relief, a quiet relief, not excitement, not celebration, just an internal, oh, I don't need to carry that anymore. Oh, that reaction doesn't feel natural anymore. Oh, This perspective no longer fits. Those moments aren't loud, but they're irreversible. Because once awareness evolves, you don't return to the old lens fully. You can still recognize it, you can still see it, but you're no longer fully inside it, you're observing it. That's the real shift. Not changing life, changing vantage point. If you've started noticing that some things that used to feel consuming now feel more distant, that's not detachment. That's perspective. And perspective is what breaks repetition. Because repetition requires immersion, perspective introduces space, and space allows choice. Not forced choice, natural choice. You begin choosing differently without trying to choose differently. You respond instead of react. You pause instead of escalate. You observe instead of assume. Not as a technique, as a byproduct of clarity. That's why real change often feels almost accidental. You don't wake up deciding to be different. You wake up noticing you already are. You look back and realize you handled something differently. You didn't overthink the way you usually would. You didn't fall into the same emotional pattern, and that recognition doesn't inflate you. It grounds you. Because it feels natural, not forced. That's awareness stabilizing. That's identity becoming more fluid. And when identity becomes fluid, life stops feeling repetitive in the same way. Challenges still exist. Difficulties still arise. But they don't feel like the same story repeating. They feel like new terrain. Not because everything is new, but because you are. There's something else worth noticing. This process isn't happening only to you. More and more people are quietly going through similar internal shifts. Not publicly, not performatively, privately. They're questioning their patterns, their identities, their narratives, not because of trends, but because awareness naturally evolves over time. It's not collective in a dramatic sense, it's parallel. Individuals independently, noticing similar things, waking up to similar realizations, not coordinated, just emergent. That's why sometimes you meet someone and immediately feel like they're seeing from a similar place. Not agreement, recognition. They speak differently, they listen differently, they don't play the same unconscious games. Those connections feel rare, but they're becoming more common. Not because people are changing, because awareness is shifting. If you've encountered moments like that where a conversation felt unusually real, unusually grounded, that's not coincidence. That's two people meeting from a similar state of presence. And those moments stand out because they break the usual patterns. They feel fresh, unscripted, alive. That's what life feels like when awareness shifts, not perfect, but real, not intense, but grounded, not dramatic, but clear. And once you've tasted that clarity, even briefly, repetition becomes harder to tolerate unconsciously. You begin noticing when you're slipping back into old patterns, not with judgment, with awareness. And that awareness alone begins changing your experience. If this resonates with you, you might find yourself recognizing small moments of shift in your own life recently, not big events, subtle changes in how you perceive things. If so, you're not imagining it. Those shifts are real, and they don't need to be rushed. They don't need to be named. They don't need to be optimized. They just need to be allowed, because awareness evolves at its own pace, not on command, not through pressure, but through recognition. You don't grow by trying to grow. You grow by noticing what feels true, noticing what feels misaligned, noticing what feels habitual rather than authentic. That noticing naturally reshapes your choices, and choices reshape your experience. Not because you're trying to craft a better life, because you're allowing a more honest one. And honesty feels different in the body. It feels lighter, cleaner, less tense, not euphoric, just grounded. That groundedness becomes the new baseline, and from that baseline, life unfolds differently. Not necessarily easier, but more coherent, less friction, less internal contradiction. You begin acting from alignment rather than obligation. You begin speaking from presence rather than performance. You begin living from awareness rather than repetition, not because you achieved something, because you remembered something. That awareness was always here. It was just layered under habits. And those habits aren't enemies. They were protective, they were functional, they were once necessary, but they don't need to be permanent. And you don't need to force them away. You just need to see them clearly enough that they no longer operate in the background. That's the shift that breaks repetition. Not force, Not discipline, not transformation, clarity. And clarity doesn't shout, it settles. You'll know it's happening not because everything changes, but because the way you experience things begins to feel subtly different, quieter internally, less reactive, more spacious. Not constantly, but increasingly. Those moments will come and go at first, then stabilize slowly, not as a goal, as a natural evolution. And if you find yourself wanting to share experiences of noticing your own patterns or shifts, others will likely recognize themselves in that too. Not because anyone is following anything, because awareness unfolds similarly across individuals when it begins to wake up. That shared recognition doesn't need to be dramatic. It's enough that it exists. This isn't a path, it's a remembering, and remembering doesn't move forward, it deepens. The conversation doesn't end here. It continues in how you observe yourself, in how you notice your reactions, in how you experience your own presence, not as work, as awareness. You don't need to hold on to this. You don't need to do anything with it. If it resonates, it will continue unfolding quietly on its own, in moments, in pauses, in subtle realizations you didn't plan. And that's where the real shift lives. Not in the video, not in the words, in the space you begin to notice between them. Sometimes after you notice a pattern clearly, life doesn't change immediately. The external circumstances often stay exactly the same. The same people, the same environment, the same responsibilities. But something internal feels different. Not lighter in a dramatic way, just less automatic. You catch yourself before certain thoughts complete themselves. You feel the impulse to react, but there's a fraction of space now. Not control, awareness. That space is quiet, almost unnoticeable if you're not paying attention. But once you feel it, you recognize it. It's the difference between being inside the reaction and watching it happen, between being lost in the pattern and noticing the pattern moving through you. Nothing needs to be done with that space. It doesn't ask for effort. It doesn't demand change. It just exists. And the more you notice it, the more natural it becomes. You might start realizing that many of the things that once felt urgent were actually just habitual. Many of the fears that felt permanent were actually just familiar. Many of the limitations you assumed were real were simply unexamined, not because you convinced yourself otherwise, but because awareness exposed them gently. There's something almost disorienting about that, not in a bad way, in a quiet way. You begin to wonder how long you've been living from certain assumptions without ever questioning them, not with regret, with curiosity. And curiosity is very different from pressure. Curiosity opens, pressure constricts. When awareness grows, curiosity tends to replace force. You're not trying to become better. You're simply more interested in noticing what's actually happening inside you, around you, between you and life. That's when experience begins to feel less like repetition and more like dialogue. Not life happening to you, not you controlling life, but something more fluid than either of those. A responsiveness. You notice. Life responds. You notice the response. Life shifts again, not as a technique, as an organic process. And the more you inhabit that space of noticing, the less trapped you feel by patterns. Not because patterns disappear completely, but because they no longer define you. They become something you experience, not something you are. That distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. You're no longer trying to escape your life. You're simply present inside it. And presence doesn't feel like effort. It feels like honesty. If you've ever had moments where you suddenly realized, I'm not reacting the way I used to, you know how quiet that shift feels. No announcement, no internal applause, just recognition. Something softened, something loosened, something changed. Those moments don't demand interpretation. They don't need to be framed. They're enough on their own. And they tend to multiply slowly when you don't interfere with them. Not because you're trying to grow, but because awareness naturally does. There's nothing you need to hold on to here. No insight you need to preserve. No realization you need to keep repeating. If any of this is real for you, it will continue unfolding without effort. In the way you listen to people, in the way you notice your own thoughts, in the way certain emotional loops begin to feel unfamiliar, not gone, just no longer convincing. That's often how change really happens, not with breakthroughs, but with quiet moments of, that doesn't feel true anymore. And you don't replace it with anything, you simply let it fall away. What remains is usually simpler, quieter, more stable, not perfect, just real. If you ever feel like sharing the moments where you started noticing those small shifts in yourself, others who are paying attention to their own experience will recognize that space immediately. Not because they learned the same ideas, but because awareness has a familiar quality when it begins to wake up. It feels less like becoming someone new and more like slowly returning to something you never actually lost. The noticing doesn't end here. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't close. It just continues naturally in the background of your life, in pauses, in small realizations, in the way repetition starts to look less like a loop and more like something dissolving on its own, quietly, without effort, without needing to be finished.